And I now would applaud the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've listened closely to the briefing from Under-Secretary General Mark Lowcock. But clearly he didn't have enough time to stay and listen to us and Syria. It's a shame. I'm sure that it would have been useful for him to hear what we have to say, and I hope that his colleagues will transmit to him very precisely what we have to say. In spite of the growing trend of stabilization of the situation over large parts of the territory and the return to Syria of peaceful life and the recovery of socio-economic infrastructure, the country still has hotbeds of tension and the population needs humanitarian assistance. In this connection, we note the active participation of the representatives of relevant UN structures, the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and also non-governmental humanitarian organizations in the provision of assistance to the population in coordination with the Syrian authorities. The situation in territories that are not under the control of the Syrian government remains extremely worrying in Idlib, a number of areas on the east bank of the Euphrates River, and in the area around Al-Tanf. In Idlib, at the beginning of January, Russian and Turkish forces undertook another attempt to establish a regime of silence and calm. However, radical groups led by the recognized terrorist organization Hayat Tahrir al-Sham once again ignored this and continued to shell the positions of the Syrian forces and nearby towns, first and foremost Aleppo. The number of these attacks is up to 60 incidents a day. Naturally, these sorts of armed provocations, which this month alone have killed dozens of people and injured hundreds of civilians, cannot go unanswered. The Syrian government forces have to respond to the attacks of terrorists and conduct limited operations to neutralize terrorist activity and reduce the threats emanating from Idlib. Today, we have heard statements delivered, as it were, saying that hospitals, markets and schools and places where IDPs are located are being bombed. We were given, as it were, accurate figures for the number of people killed and injured. We've heard that before, word for word. And once again, I would like to ask you the question, where are you getting your reliable data from? Where did you find so many medical facilities that have already been bombed? They run now into the dozens, if not into the hundreds in Idlib province alone. The reasons for the escalation in Idlib are not in the operations of the Syrian forces' operations, but rather the intentional provocations by terrorists. Since the 13th of January, in order to facilitate the withdrawal of civilians from the de-escalation zone, 3 humanitarian corridors have been operational. For those who do not have a permanent place of residence, places have been prepared in temporary accommodation centers in Hama province. Unfortunately, terrorists continue to use the practice of human shields, holding civilians hostage and preventing them from leaving and shelling the crossing points. This is another confirmation of the position that we have expressed many times, that the problem of Idlib cannot be resolved as long as the terrorists that have been, as I remind you, recognized as such by the Security Council continue to reign there. Mr. President, in the area beyond the Euphrates, it has been possible to improve the situation in large part thanks to the implementation of the Russian-Turkish memorandum from the 22nd of October 2019. Regular Russian-Turkish patrols have been established of agreed border points, and moreover, Russian forces are taking energetic efforts to rebuild destroyed infrastructure, providing medical assistance to those in need, providing foodstuffs and first aid and vital equipment. The most acute problem continues to be the humanitarian situation in addition to Idlib, is the humanitarian situation in major refugee and IDP camps located in areas controlled by the American side, Rukban in the south and Al-Hol in the northeast. For 5 months now, the UN plan to evacuate the remaining residents of the camp has been delayed due to the refusal of the fighters to provide security guarantees to UN staff. Humanitarian convoys are not being allowed into Rukban. Moreover, assistance often simply does not get to the refugees and remains in the hands of the militants. Efforts need to be continued and completed to get people out of the camp. Mr. President, Mark Lowcock today did not give a particularly high review of the cross-line assistance, and we would like to recall that the lion's share of assistance to Syria and in Syria goes through this scheme, cross-line, including to the northeast and Hasaka province. And all humanitarian agencies of the UN, apart from the WHO, deliver humanitarian assistance to the northeast from Syrian territory. I would also like to address the consequences of the adoption of Resolution 2504. The results are the fact that the resolution explicitly and implicitly focuses the UN on cooperation and finding ways to resolve problems with the legitimate authorities of Syria, in accordance with Resolution 46182, as it should be in accordance with international law. Instead of whipping up passions here, we would recommend that OCHA, as quickly as possible, establish effective cooperation with the legitimate authorities in Damascus. This is in the interest of the UN and all of us. We expect that in the February report from the UN, we will see information about alternative routes for the delivery of humanitarian assistance from Syrian territory. As we have already said, the alternative to Yerubia and the abilities to deliver humanitarian assistance to Hasaka province exist. We would like to hear about steps that have been taken to this end and the results that are achieved. Now, a few statistics which speak for themselves, as we know. 1 million people in Idlib are covered by cross-border assistance. The remaining 10 million people in Syria are covered by regular humanitarian programs. And this is data from the latest report of the UN Secretary-General. That pertains to the question that allegedly the Syrian government is not cooperating. The number of humanitarian convoys agreed with Damascus is growing steadily with each month. And the statistics were provided by the OCHA session at the meeting of the Humanitarian Task Force in Geneva. What is stable is the financing of the Syrian humanitarian plan. That figure has stuck at around 60%. And here's the interesting thing. The more territory comes under the control of the Syrian government, the fewer donor contributions there are for the Syrian humanitarian plan. Now, you referred to humanitarian principles, humanism, impartiality. Where are they? We agree with those who said today that the humanitarian plans in Syria cannot be politicized. And this pertains to post-conflict recovery as well. Some of our colleagues are saying that politicizing this by placing ever more requirements on the Syrian authorities. We call on the United Nations and members of the international community to join in with post-conflict recovery projects and also to lift unilateral sanctions in the interest of normalizing the lives of Syrians. That is, of course, if you really do care about the well-being of Syrian civilians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.